Morning, everybody. Welcome to Neck of the Woods, and welcome from myself and the Biz Dojo team. When Jade approached me and said, hey, we'd really like to get you involved and have a chat at Creative Mornings, I was pretty excited about the whole prospect of it. And then she said, the theme is going to be work. And I was like, wow, work is a pretty interesting topic to be talking about at this kind of hour of the morning. And I thought, this is, how do you approach this? How do you kind of look at what's been happening in the workplace? How does it relate to kind of what's happening in the creative sector? What does that mean for us all as we go forward into the future? And how is, things like technology changing, how we're all working together and how we're connecting? And so the way I thought I'd approach it is I'd visit my old friend Google, and we'd start off first of all by having a look at what the dictionary definition of work is. And I have to admit, before getting ready for this presentation, I hadn't actually ever looked at this, and it was quite eye-opening for me. I looked at it and I said, well, an activity involving mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a result. And I didn't feel too inspired by that. And then when I looked at the synonyms, I was feeling even worse, actually. So, labour, toil, exertion, drudgery, and then they drop the hammer with the sweat of one's brow in there. And so for me, on a personal level, that was something that I really struggled to resonate with. And I think for us all, that's an interesting perception to have of work, if that's what the common definition is of it. And to be honest, when I thought about it, I thought, well, I'd actually think I'd rather be here in the beach. And I think historically, that's how a lot of us have approached work. Work's been a means to an end. Work's been something that we did so that when we're outside of work, we could do something that's a little bit more rewarding and inspiring to us. And I think that's something that is a really interesting challenge for us, because when you look at the total amount of our life that we actually spend in the workplace, the numbers are kind of staggering. This number here, 100,000, is the number of hours that an average adult is expected to work over the course of their working life. This was a number that Charles Handy came up with in The Age of Unreason. He was looking at what was happening in the 1950s around how work was back then, and then how that was changing as we were moving into more of a world that was focused around knowledge work and the creative sectors and industries and stuff. And since that time, there's been a few people who've recut these numbers and looked at them a little bit in the context of the modern workplace. But some of the background calculations change a little bit, but the number still comes out the same. We basically, we work a pretty significant chunk of our lifetime is spent in the workplace. So if we're going to spend this amount of time, 100,000 hours of our life, I kind of felt like I needed something a little bit more aspirational for me. And around the time that we launched the dojo, we launched the dojo in 2009. We were the first co-working space in New Zealand, actually, the first people to really give this a crack. And around that time, when we opened our first space across the road, here on K Road in the Ironbank building. And I saw this thing called the Holstein Manifesto, which went viral around that time. It's been kicking around for a few years. It's this is it up on the screen here. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it before, but Holstein was a small design agency in the US, and they actually did this manifesto one day for the team, and they did it as a little side project that they pumped out, and they basically worked on it over a weekend. One of the designers laid it all up, and then they put it out on their social media, and the whole thing took off. It became this massive statement of what people are looking for in terms of your life and your passion and what you want to do around your work and creativity and who you work with. And I saw it and I thought, wow, this is awesome. I'm going to get this. I really like this. I'm going to get a print. I'm going to, we're going to stick it up in the dojo and in the reception and Iron Bank, and it'll be cool for all our residents. And I actually loved it so much that I never put it up in the reception. I stuck it up on my wall at home, and it's still hanging there today. But it always resonates with me because one of the partners in Holstey, when I ordered this print, this guy Dave, he actually emailed me about my order, and it was Holstey was quite a small outfit at the time, and he was like, "Dude, I've checked out your website. I'd never heard of this co-working thing. I love what you guys are doing around how you're trying to approach work in a slightly different way. Love how you want to support the creative sector and you want to support entrepreneurs and people trying to, succeed in their own passion." And he said, I love it, and the manifesto is perfect for you guys. And that's something that's always stuck with me because Holstey has gone on since that time. And I read an article online about them a couple of months ago. Their whole business has actually changed now. They're basically not a design agency anymore. Their entire business model revolves around the manifesto, and they go out and they have a whole lot of, they do prints, they do artwork, but they do workshops and they do events and they do programming around helping people kind of realise and, hit some of these aspects of what they've called out in their manifesto. So their entire business revolves around this now. And I think that's a really interesting and telling thing around our relationship with work and how we don't resonate with the traditional dictionary definition, but we collectively as a society, this is something that really gels with us emotionally. And so for me, I think it's summed up in this way, where you talk about work being on a spectrum, and you have, on the one hand, you have drudgery, which is the dictionary definition of work, and then on the other hand you have your passion and being able to realise your dream and share your passion and your goals, and we all sit somewhere on that spectrum. And I think as time goes on, we want to move away from drudgery, we want to try and get more to the passion side of things. And so for us, that's when we started the dojo. This was kind of the realisation for me personally, is I wanted to get away from the drudgery of the 9-to-5 job. I wanted to try and be able to do more of what I got excited about in life. And I think the insight for us here is that this is the challenge with work. Work is always going to be a combination of the two. It's not. I don't think it's ever going to be one or the other. You see a few of the gurus out there, and they say, if you're going to be a creative, you want to live your dream. If you're doing what you love, you'll never work another day in your life. And I think there's truth to that, but there's also an element of, just a little bit too blue sky. Work is work. Work is always going to be work. And the thing about it is trying to get that spectrum balanced so that you're actually, hopefully, towards the more passionate end of the spectrum and less about the drudgery. And for me, this is a little bit of first year university pop psychology coming in here. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is something that we thought about a lot when my business partner Nick and I were starting up the dojo. Basically, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a pretty simple approach to human needs and how we, basically as our basic needs in life around shelter and food and water and security and all this kind of stuff get satisfied, then we move up the spectrum in terms of what we're needing. We want self-esteem, we want confidence, we have social needs around friendship and family, and then right at the top of the pyramid is all about self-actualization. It's about realizing your potential around problem solving, creativity, innovation, and all this kind of stuff. And for us, when we started the dojo, we were all around this top end of the pyramid. Is about how do we get more of that stuff happening in terms of the needs around the top end. And we believed that was going to then move the dial for us in terms of actually being more at the passionate end of the work spectrum as opposed to the drudgery side of things. And I think there's some macro factors for us as well and behind the scenes here. So as human beings, we've all been looking at this thing around work. We want to be more passionate in terms of what we're doing. We want to feel inspired by our jobs. We want to be more creative. We want to do more interesting things. And until recently, maybe the last 10, 20 years, that's been a tricky one for us because technology hasn't actually enabled us to really unlock that kind of potential. And I think our friend Steve Jobs, we owe him a lot in a whole lot of different areas, but I think the iPhone is a great way of just kind of encapsulating that technology change. I think the last kind of decade in particular has really revolutionised that, and sometimes when you look at it, it's actually a little bit tricky, because when you're in the moment and you're seeing day to day these gradual technology changes come through, it's actually, you don't notice the quantum of what's actually happening until you actually step back and then you go, what do we look like when we were where we were 10 years ago versus where we are today, and how are we working, and what are the tools we've got, and what is the technology actually enabling us to do? And when you see that, you actually realise that the changes have actually become really significant. And for us in the creative sector, I think technology has actually unlocked a lot of things for us in terms of how we work. And the big trend that I noticed in terms of really what's driven what we've done with the dojo and in terms of this whole co-working movement is that we've had the rise of the freelancer. And I've got the rise of the freelancer here, but I'll kind of throw in something else as well. I think startup culture is something else that's really started to come in. Particularly the last 5 years, everything that you read about in the media is around innovation. It's around, we need to create more businesses. We need to be doing more startups. We need to be, coming up with new products and services. And even for larger businesses, even for big corporates, they're going, hey, we need to be thinking more like a startup. We need to be more agile. We need to do this. And this idea of the rock star entrepreneur has really kind of kicked into vogue. And you only have to look at some of the successes around the really big companies that have gone, like Facebook and so on, where you talk about how that inspires a new generation of people in terms of what they want to do in the workplace. And so this kind of trend moving from full-time employment, where people are actually really starting to do more now in the freelance space, people are actually taking the opportunity that technology has given them, to be able to work in their own way, to be able to choose how they want to do things, to be able to freelance or to have their own business. That's actually a trend that has really impacted the way we set up our business and the way that we approach work. And I think it's something that co-working is just the sharp end of this trend, and it's just going to continue to grow and to become larger and to actually continue to dominate. And so the big thing here, I think, is that this is the big insight around how work is changing. So work isn't a destination. It's not a place that you used to go to. It's an activity. It's something that we do, and it's not a place that you go. You can work anywhere. And this was something that came out a couple of years ago from Dave Copeland at Microsoft. He has probably one of the best job titles I think I've ever heard. I have no idea what a chief envisioning officer does, but I think I want some of that action. It sounds a pretty cool role. But this statement actually is something that people look at and you go, if you looked at it 5 years ago, everyone said remote offices are going to be the way we're going to do things. People are going to be able to work from home. You can choose to come into the office whenever you want. And that kind of stuff is really going to revolutionise how we do things. But if you dial forward to where we are today, that perspective has actually changed quite dramatically. And the reality is, and I think this is kind of one of the insights that we've had from the dojo side, is that you can have all of this technology. Technology can free you to do work where and when you please. But the reality is that we're human beings and we're actually social animals, and as human beings we actually need to feel connected to other people. We don't want to be isolated. We don't want to be on our own. We don't want to be sitting at home working from our little home office in our pyjamas with our cat on our lap. We don't want to be stuck in a cafe somewhere trying to do our work but completely isolated from the people that are around us. And that actually is something that's a little bit of a paradox. Technology is really enabling us to do a whole lot of different things now that we were never able to do, but we actually are now wanting to go full circle and come back and connect and actually be and have these real relationships with humans. So where we're going with this. So the thing about people needing to be connected and to have relationships with other people actually created a bit of a change in terms of what was happening in the US. And I'm kind of going to dial back a little bit to talk about where this idea of co-working came from and how it's kind of sprung into life. And like a lot of things that have come out in terms of trends in the last couple of decades, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, what was happening in kind of the tech and startup space over there, was an influencer in terms of what was happening in co-working as well. And I went back and I actually looked, you can actually go back in the archives online and you can find the original blog post that a guy called Brad Newberg posted back 2005, which was the very first reference to co-working that's actually been found online. So co-working is actually a really young industry. When you look at it and you think it's actually only just turned 10 years old this year. So it's actually a relatively new trend. And Brad Newberg, when he came up with the word co-working, he did it for a bunch of developers who were working from home, and he put a little flyer up online and he said, hey, look, come and join me at this place, Spiral Muse, which was a kind of a community centre slash kind of old converted house in San Francisco. And there was a bunch of 8 people that just got together. So it was only 8 people originally. They all got together, and they got together 2 days a week, and they just kind of said, hey, we'll come together with our laptops and we'll sit in this area and we'll do some work around each other, so we're actually surrounded by people that we can actually start to develop a relationship with. And he actually went so far as to say they didn't even have to talk to each other. He just said, all we're really interested in is actually feeling the presence of other people in the room that we know and that we're comfortable with. And that's going to add a whole lot to us in terms of our productivity and how we're managing what we do with work. And then he folded in some other stuff. They would do yoga sessions and they guided meditations. And so it was quite a holistic kind of approach to things. And that was the very first kind of co-working group that came out. But that actually wasn't a co-working space. And the very first co-working space came out maybe about 12 months later. It was San Francisco as well. These are beautiful websites, by the way, aren't they? When you look back 10 years ago with what we were doing, it's a great example. Hey, we've come a long way. But the Hat Factory was another community office space. They talked about themselves being geeks and media hackers. They were open sources, video bloggers, Drupal developers, and they were just a bunch of people who were tired of working from coffee shops and home every day, and they just got together. And from there, the co-working kind of trend really took off. The US and Europe were obviously the big hotbeds for it when it first started, but we weren't too far behind the pace ourselves here in this side of the world. So Australia was maybe a year or two behind the US when they opened. And in New Zealand, we were the first co-working space in 2009. So we're only kind of 2-3 years behind the pace in terms of this very early stage trend popping up offshore. And so this infographic is probably a little bit hard to read, but I took this off a thing called Desk Mag last night. So I guess you kind of realise when a new industry segment is really kind of taking hold when there's actually an industry publication that tracks what's going on in it. So Desk Mag is the publication that tracks co-working. They do an annual survey, a biannual survey now, which is really the gold standard in terms of information around what's happening with co-working globally. And back in 2007, there were only 75 spaces globally that were actually true co-working operators. And if you fast forward to 2015, which these stats here are basically the very latest stats have only just been released in the last day, actually. So there's now almost 8,000 spaces globally, and there's nearly 500,000 people right across the world who actually work every day out of a co-working space. So this trend is just continue to really grow, and I think that talks to the fact around co-working is one of these things that actually addresses this issue of how do you maintain human relationships in the workplace, how do you stay connected, how do you still feel like you have a good relationship with people and a community around you, even as all of the other things start to change around work, around technology, around the pace of what's happening in the workplace, around this disruption that seems to be constantly happening in various sectors, and this constant kind of pressure on us to be more innovative, to be faster, to do things more quickly and to be more creative in terms of what we're doing. And so that's kind of the background trend around what was happening 5 or 6 years ago. This is a picture of me. This is my business partner and co-founder, Nick. I'm not quite sure what we were doing here. I think we were jumping on a plane to sell the co-working dream in Australia. But basically, the two of us had come together. We worked. We actually are not creatives by background or training. I actually trained as an electrical engineer and never really worked in that space at all, actually. So I'm one of the classic people who went to university for 4 years and then never used his degree in anger once he left. But and Nick came from a technology background as well, and I guess that was kind of how we ended up getting a little bit exposed to what was happening in the co-working side of things. And we actually met working at Air New Zealand, and this picture here is of a place called Hangar 9, which is opposite, or was opposite the Vodafone building in Fanshawe Street, so just down a little bit from Air NZ's corporate headquarters. And we spent quite a lot of time in here over a period of a couple of years working on a project which was around the long-haul customer experience. And we did a lot of work with the innovation team. We were part of the Innovation and Ventures team when we were at Air New Zealand. And we were part of a broader airline team that had this challenge around reinventing long-haul travel. And there's a whole lot of things that were done in that program. There was a whole lot of interesting new products and services which would come out. Design was a huge aspect of that whole process, design-led thinking, a real focus on the customer experience. And the interesting thing for us, though, was with Hangar 9, which was basically a little skunkworks area that we had off-site for working with the project team on our different stuff. The interesting thing here is we actually got exposed to IDEO for the first time, and IDEO were massive influences in terms of how Nick and I framed up our thinking in terms of where we wanted to head. And IDEO, world-renowned in terms of design thinking, design-led innovation. But the things that we really noticed when we were working with Air New Zealand, and we had seen how IDEO approached things, was they were all about an incredible diversity of people around them in terms of their project teams. They had people from a huge range of disciplines and creative sectors. They put them in an environment which was all about fostering collaboration and experimentation, and in a very kind of supportive way, really driving forward this view that you could take risk and pleasure in terms of the work you were doing, and actually by doing that and collaborating with others, you would actually come out with some really innovative products and services. So when we finished that project and we came off the back of that, we kind of thought we were a little bit spoiled for life, and we wanted to go on and we wanted to do something else that took the elements of that project but enabled us to do it on our own terms, where we could start to move ourselves from that kind of to the passion end of the spectrum, but do it in a way that enabled us to go out and kind of do our dream and share our kind of passion as we move forward. And so we wanted to take the aspects of the IDEO experience that were awesome around collaboration, around community, around having a great bunch of people around you. And originally we wanted to do a kind of a consulting kind of play, and we thought, we'll do some consulting, but we don't want to be working on our own, so let's actually see what we can do around having a similar group of people around us as to what we'd had when we were working at the airline on this project. And it so happened that around that time we were seeing a little bit of noise around co-working offshore, and we thought, wow, this co-working thing sounds kind of pretty cool. So let's actually see if we can rock with that and set up a space. And originally the Biz Dojo space for us was actually the secondary kind of part of the equation for us. We actually thought we were going to do a whole lot of consulting, and we were going to do a bit of stuff around innovation, and we wanted to be the kind of the New Zealand IDEO guys, and we went, blah, blah, blah. And it was interesting when we got in there, because collaboration, and this is probably the insight that I wanted to talk about a little bit now, is that collaboration does work. If you get it right, you get the elements of that right, you can create some amazing products, and you have some great work experiences as you go through that. But the thing is that collaboration is never as easy as it sounds. It's easy in easy in theory, really hard in practice often. And for us, we kind of realised that once we started to get this group of people around us for this idea of the dojo. And so when we opened the dojo, we were across the road in Ironbank, and I've got a picture of the building here, and the building is a beautiful building. It was award-winning at the time. But the insight for us was that, collaboration isn't just about setting up a cool-looking space and, putting some nice furniture in and actually throwing a whole lot of people, and then all of a sudden, magically, collaboration and innovation and cool things are going to start happening. And it took us a little while to realise that, actually. It was a bit of a, we were learning as we went. But the insight for us was it's actually all about the community, and it comes back again to this whole point around, it doesn't matter what the technology is, doesn't matter what your environment is. If you don't have the right people around you and the right community around you, you're never going to get a good result. And for us, community was all about diversity, and it was about actually curating that and guiding it a little bit. Often, and this is something that I think doesn't happen enough in the workplace, it certainly doesn't happen enough in the co-working industry, is that you need to kind of guide a little bit of the community formation. You need to actually guide the types of people who come together. It's not about being prescriptive in terms of the people who come in and join the community and work from the space. You want to be open, you want to encourage participation, but you need to curate diversity. And the reason for this is that that serendipity element of these kinds of environments is actually way too important to leave to chance. The reason that IDEO set up their work environments the way they did is that they want to encourage serendipity. They want to encourage those water cooler moments, those creative collisions, and that's just too important to be left to chance. And then that flows on to the next point, which is that values actually matter. So the values of the people that you're actually working with need to be shared values. You need to have something that on an emotional level you can all resonate with. And so we learned that, and it was a bit of a process for us. This actually, I went back through the archives because I was trying to find an old photo from original dojo days, actually. And this is the original Biz Dojo crew back in 2010, I think. This was actually one of our first Christmas do's. Actually, we went on a boat trip out in the harbour and stuff. But the diversity of the people in here is actually a testament to the community. And in fact, some of these, two of them are actually been previous speakers at Creative Mornings. The one in the pink wig is Amanda Wright from Splore. And the one in the green hat a little bit further to the right, that's Kyra Clark, who is the founder of Threaded magazine. So, and we've got some other people there. We've got Tim Dawson from Ghost Street, who was with us for a number of years with his design agency, and he's moved on and set up his own studio co-working space called the Avery, just down the road from us. And we've got some other design people there. We've got Miranda Brown, the fashion designer, who's also involved in the sustainability sector. John Chapman Smith from Fu Man Design, who's around the corner now from us. So this was a really good snapshot of the kind of the diversity and the different mix of people and thinking and outlook that we had in our space when we first started. And it was a little bit accidental when we first brought all these people together, but once we realised the power of that community and what we could do, that's when we really started to really hit our straps in terms of where we were going. And this is the Ironbank community today. It's a lot bigger. This is kind of our Facebook board from across the road. We talk about diversity of perspectives and stuff. We've got some axes on these. This is actually a graph, actually. So there's the horizontal is rock and dance. The vertical is creative and tech, and people put themselves in a little spot where they think they fit, and we change those labels out periodically as well. And as the dojo's gone on from that start in Ironbank, we've actually started to scale some of our thinking. We think that the types of lessons that we've been learning around how people can work together and how community can come together and be a huge value add in the workplace, we're actually taking that thinking and we've started to apply that at larger scales. So if you've been to other Creative Mornings events, you would have been down to Grid, Auckland a couple of times, down at the waterfront. That's a bigger project that we're doing with Auckland Council around taking some of the same thinking and ethos and saying, hey, we can do it on a larger scale for a city and for an entire precinct, rather than just a smaller co-working community. We've done a similar thing in Wellington. This is our Wellington space, which we just extended and opened last month. Same deal with that. We're working closely with Wellington Council. Again, it's about collaboration. It's around partnerships. It's around coming together as a diverse community and actually working towards a common goal and some shared values and an outcome. And so the community aspect of things with us has kind of led us down this path where we think you've got to take a holistic approach to how you do things with work. I'm going to be a little bit controversial here because I know this is a tricky one for some people. You'll get a lot of people saying, hey, you've got to get your work-life balance right. And there's ways to do that. And I think for a small percentage of people, they will be able to manage that kind of juggling act of trying to get your personal life balanced a little bit with work. But I think the impact of technology has been so great thanks to these little black slabs of glass and things like that. that for the majority of us, we're just going to have to accept that work-life integration work-life balance is history. And we're going to need to deal with it. But the fact of dealing with it doesn't mean you need to accept it entirely. It's just about doing it on your own terms. And I think that's the challenge for all of us in the work environment. And that's the challenge for us as a community of workers and as creatives. And so from a dojo perspective, when we talk about being holistic, we actually talk about bringing in and merging elements of the professional life and your social and personal life together. And we embrace the fact that work-life balance is a tricky thing to get these days. This photo, actually, you probably don't recognise it, but this was taken down here in this space. Before we turned it into Neck of the Woods, it was Co-Space, which was a kind of an experimental environment for us, for makers, and we used to do a lot of events down here. I think this is the 100 Days project, actually. Did a thing here a couple of years ago. But again, it's about bringing creativity and art and music and events and stuff that you would not necessarily say is associated with your work life, but actually adds value and complements it. And I think for the creative sectors, that's an important part of, if you're going to lose your work-life balance and you're going to embrace it, then you need to make sure you're integrating these things on your terms. And Neck of the Woods, of course, is the extension of that for us. So when people say to us, hey, why has Dojo opened a bar, music venue kind of thing like this space today? Well, it's about catering to the fact that we want the people who work from our environments and who are part of our community to be able to not just work and have a great community around them from a professional basis, but that they can access complementary things that are from an art and a music and an events side of things that work for the types of people that we have from our spaces. And that's been an experiment for us that we've been really happy with. And I guess that leads me to my last point, which is work itself is getting faster, it's changing constantly. You shouldn't be afraid to experiment and adapt. And in fact, one of the learnings for us as we've done this is actually this whole Co-Space transformation into Neck of the Woods. When we opened Co-Space, we actually thought the makerspace movement was really going to hit its straps in New Zealand. We're probably a little bit ahead of the curve when we set that up. It actually turns out that a lot of product designers who we thought would be the original audiences for this kind of studio environment, they actually didn't really necessarily need this kind of physical making space. What they needed was actually more of the community around them of complementary kind of people and creatives and talents where they could focus and do some work. And so for us, we weren't afraid to experiment. We embraced that agility and that uncertainty, and we changed what we were doing. And part of this transformation into Neck of the Woods has been around actually saying, hey, well, let's actually adapt and actually do something that caters to another aspect of what our community need in order to be really, really powerful in terms of how they go in the workforce. And so I'm going to finish on a kind of a note here around, it's almost a challenge. I think this is coming back to this drudgery versus passion. It's about where are you going to park yourself on the spectrum and how are you going to get yourself there. I think this is a big challenge for all people in the workforce, but I think it's especially one for all of us in the creative sectors who are really at the pointy end of a lot of this change. And I think the changes in the workplace at times can be intimidating, and the rapid pace of technology and everything that's happening in terms of disruption and the pressure that comes on us to deliver faster and better and more creatively is actually something that is a real pressure. And I think you need to look at a holistic approach around how you can manage that and how you can kind of pull these elements of community and collaboration and support around you so that you can take that pressure and you can move yourself to the passion end of the spectrum and actually get to this kind of point, which I always come back to with the Holsti Manifesto, is that life is actually really short. Life is too short to be spending 100,000 hours just working in drudgery. It's about living your dreams, sharing your passion, and actually finding a way to achieve that. That's it for me. Thank you. Yeah.